Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello, and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Amrita Bhaumik, the VP of HR at Team Car Care. Amrita, welcome.
Thanks, Rebecca, for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. I think we first met almost maybe 3 weeks ago, almost a month ago, maybe. So I'm excited that we're here. Yeah. And for those who are new here, HR Voices explores real and fabricated anonymized employee relations scenarios through the lens of experienced HR and people leaders just like Amrita here. So we're going to evaluate realistic workplace situations and demonstrate how anyone will assess risk, apply judgment, and design practical responses. So our goal is to really kind of talk about and reveal how strong HR leaders think when facing ambiguity. We're not necessarily looking to find a single correct answer, which is always sort of the thing that I'll say, because that's the thing about HR. There's not always a single correct answer in most situations as much as we may wish that there would be. So our scenario for today is actually a scenario from the headlines. So this was a real situation that happened. It's called the viral racist incident, and it was featuring a Cinnabon employee. So essentially, the way that this scenario goes is a customer records a frontline employee at a national food chain directing racial slurs at a couple, including the employee openly declaring racist views on camera. The video goes viral within hours, generating millions of views and widespread outrage. The company terminates the employee the same day. Legal commentators later raised questions about whether the company conducted any investigation before firing, whether the video was authenticated, and whether the speed of the termination, driven by public pressure, sets a precedent that could be exploited in the era of deepfakes and AI-generated content. So this is a really light topic for a Friday afternoon for us to dive into and discuss. Let's start. I love to start kind of at the beginning. So when we look at, let's say, this is a scenario that you're faced with and something that's happening, tell me about where you would start. So before we start to think about solutions or even comment on, what happened and what didn't happen, what stands out to you as the most risky or the most unclear in the situation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca, for certainly this opportunity to speak. And before I dive in, it just hits home because this is it's so familiar to, I wouldn't say something that we're facing every day, but particularly as an HR leader and leading a large employee relations team for a very distributed multi-site business like automotive services business that is Team Car Care. It is the biggest franchisee of Jiffy Lube. These are situations that we are kind of facing, pretty often. And I think for me, at least when I think about this incident that you narrated, for me, a couple of things kind of stick out. Was there a due process followed in terms of the termination? While the company acted swiftly, and I do understand they were trying to balance the pressure on the brand, as well as, what seemingly had been recorded on camera, which is a big, I think, bane of our existence because everything is now recorded and potentially an incident which, with the help of social media, becomes amplified, right? So it's that balance which so that's kind of unclear to me from at least the first narration, that was that followed in terms of a due process and looking into what really happened, and with did we kind of balance the speed of action with being thorough in what action was taken, precisely from what you raised as well earlier, from a precedents perspective. So I think those are the couple of things that stick out to me.
Yeah, just that they're reacting. It's almost like HR is reacting to something and it's unclear and unsure as to whether or not they actually confirmed whether or not it happened, right? Like if it really happened.
Yes, and that's the hard part because, certainly, again, being a part of a retail scenario, I can see how critical it is to balance, especially the parent company. For them, the brand is extremely important and it's the reputation which kind of goes far. So, how do we balance that? We can't go too slow in terms of our reaction because that implies that we are not taking it seriously enough. But at the same time, are we acting too fast without following all the due diligence and the process? So that's always hard to do. The second thing I think I would also like to call out that it seems like it was at a franchisee location. So the ultimate employment decisions are by the franchisee owner. So the question is that, is also not fully clear to me, but I'd probably be digging in a bit more to understand that who took the decision for terminating the employment and, who was involved in the decision. So those are a couple of things that at least I question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a good call out to sort of, indicate franchisee as the decision maker versus sort of corporate, right?
Yes.
Because when we hear Cinnabon, maybe we think of, the actual franchisee or, franchise location, or maybe we think about something like this, I'm sure escalates to corporate once it becomes something so big as this, right? But I'd love to talk a little bit more about, some of the things as you're on this journey to understand, how do you start your investigation? Like if you're sort of making a plan, who do you need to hear from and who do you want to avoid speaking to too early?
Yeah, so I think I would hope that in this particular situation, as with most of us in retail environments, you have a defined sort of SOP for handling investigations. So I would definitely start with talking to people at the store who were there, and talking in the sense the store managers particularly, because the store managers like the first line of defense, right? The frontline managers who would have witnessed this situation or whatever situation happened there, make sure that they are part of the investigation process, and as far as possible document everything. And we often get told in HR that HR is trying to protect the company, but we are actually protecting the situation and making sure that there is a proper record of whatever we are discussing. So that's extremely important to make sure that it's documented appropriately. What I would avoid is stretching it out too far and talking to too many maybe witnesses or store employees, because we don't want Chinese whisper, and we don't want people's individual color sort of coming in to the incident. So and another sort of way, and we've employed that as well, that if there are sort of cameras and recording devices present in the store, so that kind
Hmm.
of is always a first line of truth, and you kind of get those records as well. So I would definitely make sure that there is a strong employee relations team which is conducting an unbiased factual, sort of fact finding process as soon as they can on this incident. And then of course coming back and making sure that there is a proper reporting done. It's ideal if the company also has some mechanisms in place, particularly here, to make sure that any kind of recording which has been done is not a deep fake or is not just AI generated. I mean,
Yeah.
making sure that there are some mechanisms to assess that. And I think the third most thing is important thing, which I think from a more really from a mid to long term perspective, is to make sure we have a social media policy in place, or the company has that, because in such situations it can be so overwhelming for the frontline manager who's possibly facing the onslaught of the questions and the viral comments, etc. So make sure that they know how to respond and they're trained in that process.
Yeah. It's a really good call out, especially in a situation where you're working with a workforce that deals with the general public.
Yes.
They're interacting with anybody and anything at any time, right? So
Yes. Yes.
having really, really clear parameters about social media, to your point,
Yes.
is I think really important, especially when you can feel a compulsion to protect yourself or to defend yourself, even
Yes.
if whether you're the person in the video or not, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
you're right, having governance and guidelines that sort of
Yes.
say, here's what you do and don't do, really, really important.
Important.
Yeah.
And one of the other aspects of that is, I always recommend, it's important to keep in mind the principles of natural justice. So, irrespective of what you're seeing in the video, if you're doing an unbiased investigation, I would first recommend suspension of the said employee versus an
Hmm.
immediate action of termination. Because once you've suspended the person, you've taken them away from the scene, you conducted your unbiased sort of assessment. It keeps an opportunity open for really making sure that there was an incident which corroborates that what the employee did was wrong. Before that, suspend the person and give everybody a fair chance to be part of the process.
Yeah. I think it's great because my next question for you was going to be what would you not do yet and why? So you wouldn't push them
Yes.
out yet, you wouldn't fire them, or and you wouldn't ignore it either. I think it's smart. Suspend
Yes.
them,
Yes.
with pay, without pay, whatever, whatever makes the most sense in the situation, but just buy yourselves a little bit of time to figure
Yes.
out what's going on here, right?
Yes. Yes. What's going
Especially
on?
in something so emotionally charged
Yes,
where things are
exactly.
going viral. It's a serious thing. Yeah.
It's hard, and the other thing, I think there is no harm in also reaching out to the concerned customers who were
Mm,
supposedly at the receiving end of this situation. I think just a small note, or calling them up and say, hey, we've seen this, it does not reflect what the organization stands for, certainly not in line with our how we want our brand to be represented, or we want our employees to kind of represent the organization. So we're looking into it. So just assure
yeah.
the customers as well that you're not being heard.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that. Would you involve the customer or offer a conversation, right? Because the customer might say, I don't want to talk to anybody, but,
Yes.
offer a conversation, offer them the space to be heard. And also, I think maybe let them know as much as you can about how the situation
Yes.
is at least being investigated, right?
Yes. Exactly. Just
Yeah.
an assurance that it is being looked into. And I think I would refrain from putting out any kind of statements and stuff before we've actually completed the process.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important too, especially when you're looking at something that has so many eyes on it, something that's truly going viral that really is, everyone's going to have an opinion. There's
Yes.
like you have to say something at some point, but you don't want to say anything too soon, but
Yes.
yeah, that's sort of the juggle, which we'll kind of get into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And what do you think is sort of a mistake that HR teams might make in a situation like this?
I think, although it's part of the job, but it's really to make sure that you conduct an unbiased investigation, right? So oftentimes that's hard to do because there are something which seems extremely egregious, and you are getting into that situation, and you think that, oh, it's how do I keep a neutral sort of outlook? So that's a mistake that I've kind of seen. Certainly, not following the process in terms of what it's laid down, as I said, a suspension versus a termination. um, and if you don't have a plan for investigation, so the process of investigation really needs to be making sure that you touch all the aspects of it and be very thorough about it, document it effectively. So if you're not doing that, it just leaves it open to interpretation and something which cannot be potentially legally defended later. So those are some of the
Yeah.
mistakes I would say that HR teams need to avoid.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I'll emphasize with you on the documentation part too. Just
Yes.
write everything down, every conversation, gather as much as you can, get, whether it's emails or, whatever information you can just to make sure that
Yes.
you have that as part of the case so you know that you have the full story and you're
Correct.
not missing things. So,
Yeah.
at some point, we're doing the investigation, we're kind of validating whether or not this incident actually did happen, which is a wonderful little part of the new world of technology that we're in, right? Like you can see someone do something and not even know if it actually happened. So
Yeah.
we're validating that. We're getting, we're talking to the people who were there. We're talking to the customer. At some point, HR has to make a call of some kind, right? So can you walk me through how you'd weigh some of the competing pressures? Not even what the call should be, but like what are you juggling and how do you weigh those?
I think, well, all through my career, it's been fairly. I mean, the first point of consideration is what is the company policy, or what do we stand for, as what is the company policy? What are the processes? How do we want to be known? What are our values, right? So if there is something which is, through the investigation is revealed that it is misaligned with that, it's I would think a pretty easy decision. So it's a matter of course, not a unilateral decision which HR takes, but it just makes that conversation so much more easier, I would think, because you have that perspective and context to look at. I think in terms of future steps and actions on this particular case, really, if upheld that indeed it is an accurate incident which happened, then involving of course your legal team, involving employee relations lawyers, as well as your the operations team, and making sure that everybody is fully aligned with the outcome of the investigation and the suggested way forward, right? So I think that is extremely important. And of course, also looking at precedents, because some certain, when as you investigate, you find that there were some early warning signals, or there were some incidents which were overlooked or not probably handled the right way. So did that happen? Making sure all that is also bubbled up to see that we are we take some lessons from it for the future. So it's that, I mean, it's and doing all of it pretty speedily. So as I said,
Hmm.
it's extremely important to balance that, because every minute that you kind of take over this process while being thorough is also impacting your brand in this age of social media. So it's balancing it with that sense of urgency.
Yeah. I think that's the hardest part is the time pressure
Yes.
because you want to move fast to make sure that you're, clear that you're addressing the situation, or if there is something that you need to take action on that's blatantly obvious, you want to make it clear that you do that quickly.
Yep.
But, it's like if you act too fast, then you could be missing things. You could be setting a precedent that doesn't actually reflect the values of the organization or
Yes.
even the legal protections of
Yes.
people, right? There's just so much there if you're moving too quickly.
Yes.
And how do you factor in I guess, the public opinion part? Because, when something goes viral, there's sort of the part where it's everywhere and then it just disappears and people are on to the next thing. So, how does the virality element and the social pressure element get weighted for you?
It is part of your brand and your image. I think I briefly mentioned it at the start that it is extremely important to have a social media policy in place, because that sort of guides not just incidents like this which are unfortunate or become viral, but it also guides how an employee who's in your uniform, let's say, or at your store is behaving, because it's to emphasize the fact that every minute you're donning our uniform, or you're in the store, you are representing the brand. And it doesn't matter whether you're working for a franchisee or you're working for the corporate or whatever, but you're representing the brand. And there are some very strict guidelines in terms of what you can and cannot do, even when you're personally representing yourself in your personal social media handles, etc. So that training is extremely important to prevent such things from happening. So I think that's the start. It's foundational. It's with real scenarios, because we, as I said, large retail businesses, they kind of send out their handbooks, and at the time of orientation, expect everybody's read the 160 pages and they know exactly what's going on. But more often than not, it's the scenarios which are so nuanced, but constant training around it is critical. So talking about it
Yeah.
and, mentioning that this is what we are seeing. So, hey, this is not acceptable, or this is not what you do. So I think things like that, right? So is the key is the training and constant reinforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the training is so important too. I mean, I remember one of my first HR jobs, I was working in HR for a store on Fifth Avenue. So I was working at Lord
Yeah.
and Taylor, so big department store with like 1,000 employees. Um, on the holidays, we were 2,000 people because we double our staff in
Yes.
seasonal. So like lots and lots of people, high volume, high traffic situation. And I was the trainer, so I had to train everyone on all the store policies. And like you said, this is a document. It's a handbook that's super
Yes.
thick that no one remembers
Yes.
at the end of the day. And I remember the part that would always get um, the most attention was we would have sort of not rules of conduct, but sort of like best practices, I guess you'd call them, for interacting with hostile customers.
Yes.
Because sometimes customers will just bring out the worst in you,
Yes.
racism aside, right? Like that's its own issue, but just in how the general public can push your buttons. And when you're representing an organization, to your point, when you're wearing the uniform, the name badge, whatever it is, you kind of you have to have the tools to handle that,
Yes.
so that and practice that so
Yes.
that you have those skills when you don't need them. So when they do
Yes.
come up, you maybe, even if it's just you just learn to just step aside and call your
Yes.
manager, that was basically
Yes.
our default. It's
Yes.
like you don't have to handle customers that are being unreasonable.
Yes.
This is what your managers are trained for and frankly what they're paid for.
Yes.
But it all relies on employees tapping into that when the moments come up, which is hard.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And it is, the customer's right, but up to a point, and reasonableness is extremely important. And,
Yeah.
training our frontline managers, again, as you said, to learn how to de-escalate the situation, right? And handle it. So, it's a constant reinforcement of that. So it's not an easy job, but at the same time, what I've seen is that people with the true passion of wanting to be with customers and dealing with people, they like doing this job, so
Yeah.
um, you know, how do we equip them with the tools and resources to handle it?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the question. So when you do have someone who has sort of that, you have a staff that has that sort of heart and passion for working with customers, knows what they're signing up for when, you're working with the general public. What's something that, let's say you're onboarding groups of managers or groups of people to handle, just ambiguous situations like this. What's one thing you'd change about how employee relations is taught to managers specifically?
Yeah. So, and it's an interesting point you raise because, again, drawing a quick reference to the business that I support, it is you firstly need to be very passionate about cars because everybody from the general manager to the starting techie, they love working in cars, right? So
Yeah.
they just love getting under the hood and working on your vehicle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they also like working with customers, right? Because it's a different skill. And here's what we found: the interesting thing is that we've said we that's kind of in at least the talent acquisition or the hiring process. We always say that we can teach you how to service a vehicle, change oil, or change your windshield wiper, but we cannot teach customer really wanting to be with customers. So that's
Yeah.
the sort of, I think, the competency or the skill that we at least look for at the hiring process itself, to see that do you truly like being with customers, and here are the situations that you're likely to face. Even though your customer is probably not going to leave the vehicle, they'll keep sitting there. But there are very different situations that you'll face every day. So we try and watch out for that, or assess for that rather, to see if that's truly an area of interest. And in terms of employee relations, I think training, it really starts at the top, what we call as the head of the household, or the store general manager, making sure that they really are invested in our guest principles, and they do truly believe that focusing on customer retention is one of your KRAs, and it's extremely important for that store. So how do you do that, and how do you create an environment where everybody is demonstrating the same behavior? So that's extremely, I think, critical in terms of the training that we do. And really, I think it's a reinforcement, as I said, through the situations that we see, and we kind of observe where things could have been done differently to de-escalate a situation or handle a customer better. Constant training on that. So
Yeah.
these would be, I think, the two, three things that we at least do from an HR perspective.
Yeah. I think I love that. And in this kind of scenario, when you're looking at it's a franchisee location, so you mentioned that there are certain different decision makers at different levels when you're working with franchises, right? So,
Yes.
so who ultimately owns the outcome here?
It's definitely our role to protect the brand and protect the company processes and what the brand, and in our case it's Jiffy Lube, Shell, etc. But in case of the this particular franchisee, it is Cinnabon. So they definitely, while they own the decision, they really need to be mindful of following the due processes and making sure that the customers also being addressed, as well as the media. So it is the owner's decision, but making sure with all the due processes being followed, particularly the HR and legal ramifications of it.
Yeah. And I agree that I agree with that. And maybe even, Cinnabon corporate giving those
Yeah.
franchisees the tools to do that, right? Giving them
Yes.
the policies, the standards, this is the
Yes.
Cinnabon way. When
Yes.
in doubt, this is your handbook. If
Exactly.
you need help navigating, that's where I think the teamwork part kind of comes in, especially in a situation, you know,
Absolutely.
a franchisee might not get everybody involved, might not get corporate involved in just a typical termination, right? But something that has
Yes.
the virality element and the social media element, I think you kind of have to call someone and say, "Hey, we might need some help here."
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. So we're just at the end of our conversation, which is crazy because we could keep on going, I think. But I have one last question for you. So, for those folks, those HR folks who are listening to this and kind of looking for, just more guidance about navigating the gray and the nuance and everything, what advice would you give to someone, or what advice would you give to an HR leader who's facing a scenario like this for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you said it very right. It's the grays. So in HR, I think it's navigating the grays, which becomes the critical skill that, I guess, with experience one develops. I would just advise that making sure that they've been thorough, they've been unbiased, and they've made sure that they've documented everything in at least in the process of the investigation which was conducted, there is a very real pressure of time, because there will be the corporate reputation, as I said, which is at stake. And there is obviously, it's being coming at it from multiple directions. But to kind of make sure that even through all that noise and that pressure, making sure that they do their job, and they follow the due process, and they are thorough, as well as they are the independent voice. So trying not to lose sight of that ever. And I think really making sure that you partner with your legal team, your employee relations lawyers, with the operations teams, just to make sure that the decision which is taken and ultimately arrived at has everybody's buy-in, right? So HR has that wide-angle lens, and they are able to see implications which oftentimes operations, etc., may not see. So make use of that, and speak out about it and things. So these would be the top 2-3 things. And I think on a longer term, do sort of kind of insist, or try and see if you can put in a mechanism for training and equipping our frontline managers, because they are the ones who are really facing the situation day to day. And the more trained they are, the better and it would be, and lesser would be such kind of incidents.
That's excellent advice. And thank you for sharing that too. And thank you for sharing your perspective and your wisdom and everything with everybody here too. I think this one is one, I think that there's so many different versions of it that might be happening. And I'm curious to kind of see, since this is an actual story from the headlines, what precedent this sets, and, sort of how this kind of impacts how we all might have to make these decisions in the future.
Yes.
So thank you for having this conversation with me, and thank you for being here. This is fun.
Of course, it was fun for me, Rebecca. Thank you for the opportunity, indeed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.